Let's talk a little bit about music. Just entertainment in and of itself is the biggest form of social conditioning today. You ever wonder why all of the musicians become political now? All the celebrities are now political activists now. Don't we see this uniformity in worldview? Look at everything out there today. Aside from, of course, the pockets of dissent, the pockets of conservative Christian views, aside from those tiny little ostracized pockets, let's look at what we're seeing around today, just in general, as far as entertainment, media, and influential figures are concerned. Do we not see this uniformity of worldview? Everyone kind of believes the same thing. Now, some may be different religions, some may have no religion at all, but they all believe in this idea of this libertarian, do as thou wilt, do what you want. And the idea of diversity is promoted so heavily today. Yet there's no diversity in thought. There's no diversity in worldview, at least what we're presented in the mainstream. Everyone seems to think the same or accept the same ideas. Where's the diversity in thought? Diversity in everything else, though, but there seems to be this uniformity when it comes to what's true, and that is basically untrue. Relativism. First, I'd like to paint a picture of how music has developed over time, at least since the 80s. And I believe this type of, our first experience with the libertine worldview in music could go back to the 50s, right? With artists like Elvis Presley and, the whole movement of the teenager, which I discussed in my How Media Shaped a Generation. This idea of teens becoming their own demographic for the first time. They become a new market to be sold products and to be sold ideas. And usually these ideas are demonstrated through freedom, through loose lifestyles, having fun, staying out late, going to movies, doing drugs, smoking cigarettes, getting drunk. All of this stuff was kind of pushed on to young people in the 50s during this emerging concept of the teenager. With the concept came this lifestyle. And from there, moved into rock and roll and the disco era, which brought in the neo-pagan, pansexual component, homosexuality, transgenderism, all that stuff. That directly came into society through the disco era, at least as far as popular culture is concerned. It's always existed. So these are ways that music has kind of debilitated our worldviews of who we are. And this is how music and culture has kind of confused us about what's important. It's altered our value system. We stop thinking about what's actually important, and we start focusing on fleshly desires and things that feel good. We start focusing on feeling things, getting high and having sex, chasing women chasing men, or women trying to appear attractive for men, women living their lives to attract men and kind of show up other women, this whole territorial, competitive culture. And of course, as this all transpired, the family was broken apart because we all become atomized, and it's all about, doing you and getting what you got to get, and it broke us down. And now we're at a point where being on your own is valuable in many cases, right? Some people have to kind of make it on their own to find, what life is really about. It's not the smartest thing to just jump into bed with somebody and get married and have all kind of kids when you have no sense, when you don't know anything about the world, when you don't know anything about who you are and how things work, and you have no economic foundation. It's absolutely insane to do that. I think it's foolish to create families from that. Families are important. I think we are supposed to multiply. We are supposed to replenish the earth. But everyone's not meant to have kids. I always talk about that. Sometimes bringing kids in this world could create a lot of chaos. And we see that, especially in the inner cities and in other neighborhoods where babies are just popping out left and right, and there's no fathers in the home, and the mothers are either abusing drugs or living some scandalous life, or maybe trying their best to be good parents. Okay, they're all not horrible mothers, but still a boy raised without a father is always the recipe for disaster. And then you have these inner city communities are usually pretty violent. There's a lot of drug abuse, drug sales, gang violence, and basically these poor kids are given up to the streets. The streets raise them, and they just end up killing each other off, and it becomes a cycle. This is what we're dealing with today, and it has a lot to do with the music industry, I believe, from my view. Though the gangster rap still does exist, but it's more on the underground level, especially like Chicago drill music. It's a huge scene, but it's not as mainstream as some of this pansexual music that we're getting today by artists like Megan Thee Stallion and Lizzo and all of these just lunatics. Basically, we're being entertained by complete lunatics is the point here, and these lunatics create culture. These lunatics create create worldview. They change your worldview. I've always said this. Movies, music, it's not just entertainment. It's actually giving you a worldview. It's giving you a perspective. And today, they're just filling all the media with political positions. It's all political now. They're not even, shying away from it. It's just so obvious. So it's no wonder these kids are so screwed up in the head. So yeah, party, drugs, guns, death, sex, homosexuality, pansexuality. That's all we're being fed today through music. This Caligula type of culture, especially through hip hop. And I say hip hop is no longer hip hop, it's actually pop music. So we can talk about pop music, and it's mainly this type of sexualized, drug-based rap music. And I love hip hop. I love music, but there's a difference between music and mainstream music. And there's also, subgenres and subcultures that are completely demonic as well. I'm not trying to demonize music or anything. So this idea of music, the psychology of music, let's look at four things. It influences your health, it influences your behavior, the way you execute behavior, it affects or influences your attitude, and it also influences your learning. And I'm going to explain how it does this, but it also influences your entire system, your world system, or your world view, right? Your overall life system. Music directly influences all of these aspects of who you are. Now, some people passively listen to music. Some people aren't really into music as much as others. I mean, music has been, I'd say, aside from movies, the most influential part of my life growing up, especially growing up in the 80s and 90s, where the music industry was really starting to become a huge phenomenon. It's hard to escape. And of course, some people just really don't care so much for music. And those types usually are saved from some of this, but they still experience it through film. Film does it just as much. So how does it affect your health? Your health is probably the last thing that's affected after all of the rest. So let's start with the execution or your motivation. Music is motivational. If you listen to a certain kind of music, it's going to give you certain types of motives, right? If you listen to very hyper-violent music that's just constantly giving you imagery and ideas of death and murder and violence, it's going to motivate you in a way, not to go commit crimes, but it's definitely going to guide you in a certain way that's counterproductive to your experience in the world. Or at least it's going to open you up to these ideas. And it changes your attitude. Music kind of changes the way you feel. If you listen to a lot of these dark types of music, it changes the way you feel. These things can't be denied. And the way you analyze ideas, or the way you evaluate ideas, educational influence, all is related when it comes to music. So then there's this idea of repetition. So let's say you're listening to a detrimental form of music. It changes the way you feel, it changes the way you live your life, it changes your value system. Then I think that would affect your health in the end, right? If you're not living right, you're smoking drugs, and you're drinking all the time, you're chasing women, you're being hypersexual, and this goes both ways, men and women. I'm not just attacking the males. If you live this type of life, it's going to affect your health in the end. And then you think about repetition, constantly listening to music over and over and over and over again, all day even. It indoctrinates the mind. Now, some of us, like me, myself, I don't really listen to music that has lyrics personally. I like instrumental music, all types of instrumental music. So in that case, you avoid some of these messages and stuff. This is really focusing on the current generation, especially the younger generations, right? I'm more concerned with them because they're the future and they're the ones impacting culture today. We're not impacting culture. We're not. If you're over 30, you ain't doing nothing regarding the culture. You're just copying the culture. You're just following all the youth culture. That's it. Or you're just completely denying it altogether and detaching yourself from it, as I do, and many of us do. So yeah, it indoctrinates the mind. It engages with spirits. And that's a metaphysical thing. It's not something I aim to prove, but it's definitely something I believe. And also, music is used to deliver a specific type of consciousness, right? It kind of enters your own reality, and it indoctrinates you in a way that changes your view of the world, and you live your life in a particular way because of it. Like, I remember growing up, listening to a lot of like Too Short, Mac Dre, and all this kind of stuff growing up in the Bay Area. It completely transformed my perspective of women. Culture really affected my behavior. So even though I may have thought certain things deep down, my behavior would be different. It's just part of being a kid, part of being a teen, especially when you're easily influenced. You may do things are wrong, but you still do them because, hey, everyone else is doing them, right? This is what's popular. This is what's cool. So you find yourself taking on these paths of being a womanizer, or just focusing on women in general, just focusing on sexuality, being with women, or for women, focusing on being attractive, just completely consumed, preoccupied with being sexy, with making men drool, or making men jock you, is a word we used to use back in the day. And just it's all narcissism at the end of the day. But this is what music and culture breeds. It breeds behavior. Even though music was bad then too, you see the stuff today. It is just a culture that is referencing a mentally ill source. It's all mental illness. Everything you're seeing in music today are just messages from a mentally ill perspective. Even Hitler, we can think about Hitler. I believe said like the way to control the future is to control the youth, right? In Mein Kampf. And that's true. If you control the youth, you control the future. And that's why I focus so much on the youth culture. Even if many of us over 30, or those of us in our 40s and 50s don't know none of this culture, we don't even care about any of this culture because it doesn't directly affect our lives. It may not directly affect our lives per se as an individual, but it directly affects the future and the society as a whole, and mainly the children. Some of us got kids, some of us got families that we need to look after. And these cultures are directly affecting the children and the younger males, the young adult males, the males in their 20s, males in their early 30s are falling victim to a lot of this stuff. You don't have to be a teenager, especially with the whole pushing back of maturity. I mean, maturity has been pushed back almost 20 years now, where you have guys in their 30s who are acting like they're 18 and living like they're 18. They don't have jobs, they don't have education, they don't care about jobs or education, or they're chasing some fruitless lifestyle. And these young boys, they grow up with no parents, or sometimes just one parent, just a mother, and they're just giving up to the streets. And not only are they giving up to the streets, but there's this soundtrack to the streets given through this genre of music, and this soundtrack becomes their guidance, it becomes their directive, it becomes the architect of their worldview, and it changes the way they speak, it changes their understanding of the English language. They can no longer speak English properly, and I'm not saying you have to speak proper English, but they don't even understand concepts. They're beholden to the parameters of the music. They're beholden to the parameters of the lyrical content of the music that they listen to, because no one reads anymore. People don't actually pursue information anymore in that sense. The only information people pursue today is social media information about other people. This novelty. People very rarely today, especially the younger people, they're not out there trying to understand the world around them. They're researching information that can give them some type of understanding. Now it's all entertainment. Everyone's just loosely entertaining themselves on a daily basis. This is the just way to be today. What's your Instagram? Hit me up on Instagram. Did you watch that one show? Did you see that one series? I'm so obsessed with this show. This is all I know. This is all I can talk about. The shows I watch and the music I listen to and the brands that I like to wear. Or some, you guys know what I'm talking about. And if I'm speaking to you right now, don't get mad. It is what it is. I mean, no disrespect. I'm only here to speak truth. But yeah, I think Tacitus said the more corrupt the state is, the more corrupt the laws are. Look at our laws today. Legalizing or abortion, promoting prostitution as work. Look at the laws. Look at the corruption of the laws. It's because the culture is corrupted. Once you corrupt the culture, you corrupt the politics. And then the laws and everything else is corrupt. You put garbage in, you get garbage out. And the reason I promote the Christian faith is not only because it's my faith, but I understand that it has a foundation to give you order, to give you rules, to give you understanding of how everything works here, and of course to give you intrinsic value because you've been created in the image of God. Because if you just think you came from some accidental chance reaction of some Bang theory or something, there's no value to your life, and there's no reason you should value life or value anything, because everything is just, accidental, right? And this is just logic here. So we have this whole idea of music and this new musicality, right? So what's musicality? Musicality is the extent of which music has an influence or effect. Every form of music has a musicality to it. This is, what do you experience while listening to the music or being part of the culture? What thoughts does it give you? What feelings does it give you? And what is a physical initial reaction? Sometimes people turn on a song and it gets them angry. It works them up. It makes them want to go out and do something. Sometimes people listen to a song and it makes them sad. You get in these nostalgic feelings. Now, I'm not putting any value judgment on that per se, but I'm just making it clear. Music does give you these feelings. It does make you think a certain thing. If you're listening to music that only talks about 3 concepts, sex, drugs, and violence, what other thoughts are you going to get from the music? You can't just be listening to the beat, because if that was the case, you just only would need to listen to instrumentals. And some people like the cadence over the instrumentals, I get it, but they always fall into the lyrics as well. You start to it becomes part of you. especially with the young. Maybe the older people, more mature people, we could be a little more, we have better discernment. But now with these young kids, man, it's just you're molding animals. You're molding monsters, should I say. So what are your thoughts when you're listening to this music? What are your feelings? What are you sensing? What is your body sensing? All these things are important to think about the music when you're considering the musicality of things. Now, some of us, may enjoy music that kind of makes us feel nostalgic, and you kind of get that melancholic feeling. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That could be very enjoyable for some of us, but I'm more speaking to this amoral and hedonistic and very, I'd say, negative, hypersexual, violent, these types of things. And sometimes we like things that are bad for us too, right? Like say you like scary music for some reason, or say you like scary movies, right? You enjoy scary movies, but those movies give you bad feelings. They make you feel physically a little something that's not necessarily good, and they give you bad thoughts. Maybe you should stop watching those movies. That's the point here. What I'm getting at is what you entertain yourself with has a physical, psychological, and spiritual effect on you directly. None of this is considered in terms of the industry at all. In fact, I think it is utilized to manipulate. They purposely put negativistic ideas into music because they understand what level it works on in the human being. Just like with Instagram and YouTube, they understand that controversial, negative things get more hits, get more views. There's this sadomasochistic component there, or masochistic. There is this natural tendency for the human being to be somewhat masochistic. It's not good. It's not good for you, especially taking on too much. They don't even want to go out and play anymore. Yeah, play sports. Yeah, exactly. And you see kids when they're out together, they're all on their phone. It's disturbing. It's disturbing, especially when you come from an era where it was all about going out and playing sports. It was all about going out and being physical with the world. Back to this idea of atomizing society. That's what we're experiencing now. We're all being broken down into little individual atoms, little processors that are subject to what we download. And we no longer have that desire to break out of it and try to be more than just what's popular, more than just what everybody else is doing. Now, it's harder to do that today because we're conditioned on a 24/7 basis by way of these little smart technological pieces or machines. And then you add in the drugs and it just makes everything worse because the drugs just cool you out, make you nice and chill and open. They just make everything okay. They lay down the foundation for you to consume all those things that are probably not too good for you. People are maturing way later, and some aren't maturing at all. And there's so many arguments here. There's political arguments, socioeconomic arguments. This is just how we're seeing things here. How music has a direct effect on you physically, spiritually, and mentally. And I bring up this, I guess, give more understanding to why it's so important that we address the messages and the types of music that is being popularized today, and mainly the specific artists that are putting out these messages. Right? All these people selling you a worldview, selling you a way of life, not just good music that makes you bob your head and dance around. They're selling you a new way of thinking. So through repetitive listening, it opens up your subconscious, making one more vulnerable or suggestive, or more apt to do things that you probably wouldn't normally do. And then you mix in the drug culture. Isn't it interesting how drug culture goes hand in hand with the music culture? They're one and the same. So it shows you the dangers of it. Now these kids today, especially those that listen to hip hop, very rarely do they not partake in the drugs as well. But the thing is, they're not growing out of it. They're 40, 50, living the same lifestyles. It's so sad. Think about it, you're born into this world, and the stumbling block of the world, especially when you don't have anything to believe in, you don't have no foundation in truth and understanding and knowledge, you take on the culture becomes that foundation. And unfortunately, the culture is just, it's satanic, it's demonic, it's psychotic, it's narcissistic, it's histrionic, it's sociopathic. Our culture today is the cluster B spectrum externalized. And all that's left is casket, jail, poverty, or just endless delusion. It's a sad story. But this is where music is leading everyone.